There are lots of tools and gadgety gizmos that I use in my sewing studio all the time, and some of them you may have seen before and you're using and you agree and they're amazing, or you've seen them and you're not sure you're using them correctly, or maybe some of these are things you've never seen before, didn't realise exist, or had seen but didn't know what they do, so didn't know whether you needed them or not. So I'm going to show you some of the bits and pieces that I really rate. The video is not sponsored by anyone in any way, it's just my opinion on what I find really useful to me in my sewing studio. So have a little watch and see what you think. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the different tools and bits and pieces that I have in my studio, but it's a few that I think are interesting to discuss. Let's go through them one by one and I will show you why I think they're really cool. We'll start with the one that I think we probably all use the most, which is the Unpicker. Now, I still meet people who don't use an unpicker and they either use tiny scissors or a pin to try and unpick the stitches. These are built to make your life easier. So we have the little red ball here that protects the inside of your fabric when you're unpicking. Inside this little bit here, we have a little blade that is going to use to cut your stitches, and this pointy end here is to be able to get into those stitches to really hoik them out. Now, as you can see, I have a couple of different ones here. I have two of this one. I have this one, which is really old and totally blunt, and I couldn't tell you why it still lives in my studio, but it does. And then this one, which I was bought, and it came with a couple of extra different fittings that go in there. Now, I have a preference, and it's really bizarre, isn't it, to have a preference? And I'm sure this one was probably, it was a gift, I'm sure it was more expensive, but I don't find the blade in here to be quite as sharp as the Prim one. I just think that this is a really great unpicker. It's compact, it's comfortable to use, your lid fits on the end. You'll still lose the lid, but you've got the option there, you know, to be able to easily transport it about. And it's just a really great unpicker. I mean, you'd think it looks identical, right? But I do find this one to be sharper and more accurate with cutting and ripping my stitches than the other two options. But in this studio, I like there to be unpickers everywhere I go. So I have them floating around in all the different corners so that I am never without one for when the moment arises. Now, there are a few Prim products in this list, and this seems like an odd one to mention, but it's one that I absolutely adore because it's this ring that holds my bobbins, and I have had so many different options for storing bobbins over the years, and I find that they always rattle around and come unwound hugely, and I just end up in a big tangly mess. Whereas this, I can tip it upside down, they don't fall out, they stay within. I get a little bit of unraveling, but on the whole, given how much this gets moved and rummaged around, really not that much unraveling at all, because the rubber really helps keep them secure in here. So if you're struggling with a bobbin storage solution, then I absolutely rate this one. I think it is one of the best options available. And whilst we are on Prim products, we shall discuss this, these are chalk wheels. Now, I have two different versions of it. This is just a standard chalk wheel. They come with lids on, and you can hear. So this wheel turns around and deposits this powdered chalk on your fabric. These come with refills so that you can just refill this little bit you can buy separately. And they come in different colours because obviously if you're working in white, then white chalk's thoroughly unhelpful. But to get a visual on what they do and why they're so good, let's see, I think the white chalk's probably going to show up the best. Let's check it out. So you just roll this along and it gives you this really cool, crisp line. Yeah, the yellow shows up nicely as well. You can see that this one's running out slightly. I use these a lot for marking out because, as with all chalks, they rub off, and if they leave a little bit, then you can use a little bit of water and they come out in the wash. So it's a really great way of doing it. But the other reason why I love this is because of this one. It comes with this attached to it, which is a seam guide. So the idea being that if you have a pattern that you've drawn or for whatever reason doesn't have seam allowance on, or you need to add some to, maybe you're trying to make it longer, whatever it may be, you run this wheel down the line and it will chalk you a line, either 1.5, 2.5 or 4 centimetres offset from wherever the wheel is, which is just so helpful when it comes to working with a lot of my patterns. It means I don't have to add seam allowance to them if I've self-drafted, because I know that I can place it on the fabric, whiz around with this, and all sorted. Now the refills for this are identical to these, so you could have both of these in your studio and you've only got to buy the one set of refills for them. But it is just, when it comes to chalking, it gives you a much crisper, more accurate line than the traditional chalk method. Now let's switch to these little beauties. These are fabric snips, and they are so great to have next to your sewing machine because they are quick to pick up. You're not having to put your hands in like you would a traditional pair of scissors, and they are there just to cut the threads that are left on your stitching. Because they're so little, they're really easy to get in close to the stitching and leave very little left. And I just find them so helpful to have in the studio. They're nice and compact and a great thing to have next to your sewing machine. And then we have this cool piece of kit. I love this. You might be able to spot here what it's for. It is for spacing buttons and buttonholes on your placket. So no longer do you have to measure your distance and try and figure out what your accurate spacing is. You literally spread this out. You see it'll go quite far, quite compact, depending on the size of what you're working with. There's no reason you have to have this many buttons. Obviously, if you only want to work out the 3, you would just use some of it. And it just means that you can so quickly and easily mark where you want your buttons and your buttonholes to go. It's the simple things in life that make things so much better. And then we have this. This is one of the new gadgets in my studio. And when I saw it recently, I had to have it. And it has been amazing. I am so thrilled with it. Now, it looks like a piece of weird medical equipment. It is not. Do not panic. It is for turning straps. So the idea of what you do is that all I have done is what you'd normally do with a strap, is I've stitched it right sides together, all the way up the sides, trimmed it back, and at this end I've stitched across the end. We shall thread this end of the strap onto here. So we've got our closed end at this end. You want that solidly on the end so that this bit pushes it in just ever so slightly, which will mean it will then roll onto the other side. I usually only take it as far as until I can see this bit, so I can pull this off and your strap is turned. It's mad, isn't it? I've spent years with lots of different things trying to figure out pushing them down. If I've got particularly wide straps, I quite often use a ruler. But these, oh my God, I am just in love with them. I've only found them in one shop in the UK. They seem to be an American product, but I adore them. I will put a link down below to where I found these in the UK, but that doesn't mean that that's the only place they're available. It's just the only place I managed to find them at the time. These are tracing wheels. So they again come from lots of different brands, lots of different sizes. You can see that the spikes on this one are substantially longer than the spikes on these. This one, again, is one of those, I don't know why I still keep this in my studio moments. The spikes are almost totally blunt these days. They don't do very much, but I've had it since I was at university, so it almost feels like a slight moment of nostalgia for me. And it is used for tracing patterns off. So if you are layering a piece of paper underneath your paper pattern and you want to take a copy because you don't want to cut one size, or you want to be able to keep your original and not affect it in any way, you would run this along your lines and it would leave these indentations, like little marks on the paper underneath. So if we pull in some pattern paper, I will show you. So if you had a pattern on top, it still goes through, and hopefully you can see it leaves these tiny little dot marks on the paper. This one does the exact same thing. They're a little bit finer, a little bit further spaced out, but it does the same thing. So it just leaves these cool little lines, and you can usually get through a couple of layers. So if you wanted to create 2 versions for, maybe you were trying to copy the pattern off for a friend, whatever it may be, then you could put a couple of pieces of paper underneath and it would still go through and mark it absolutely fine. A couple left to go, and this one is a little innocuous little thing. Looks very simple. It looks just like a ruler, but the perk is this little slider in the middle. And what it enables you to do is if you went to your iron, for instance, and you knew you wanted to turn up a 1-inch hem, you would set this slider to 1 inches, and then you would know that is the distance, and so you can just really easily and quickly, without having to pay that much attention to what the numbers are doing, just instantly spot an iron and press it up. But the other thing that this has on, because we like these tools to be more than one thing in once, is it's got this nice point here for turning out your corners. Now this one is one I wanted to bring in because it's something that doesn't seem to be being used on the sewing bee, and it is such a useful piece of kit. So this is used for things press-on fastenings, and more often than not when you buy press-on fastenings like this is a snap, you will get pieces of equipment like this and these and told to hammer them into place, which works, but these work better and more effectively. So we shall pop these into here, grab ourselves a piece of fabric, and then for a snap, for instance, we will push the point through our fabric, secure that there, pop our other side on, and then all you have to do is squeeze. It's just a hand squeeze. I like to give it a really good solid one. And then your snap's attached really effectively. They just are a really efficient piece of kit, and whether it be the press-on snaps or rivets or you can get jeans buttons, they always come in the packet with the fixings that you would need, and they, just as they attach to here, also attach to these so that you can use them. They make doing stuff like this so much easier. It's worth the extra money, and they just sit in a box with my snaps. They come with this nice little piece of metal that helps keep them together, keep everything neat and tidy. And yeah, it's just more effective than using the hammer. As I say, there are lots of things in my studio that I couldn't live without. The basics: scissors, a good tape measure, somewhere to put your pins. I like a magnetic pin cushion because I'm clumsy and often throw my pins around. A cutting wheel and a board if you're planning to want to be able to do any sort of quilting, or sometimes people prefer them to using scissors to cut their paper patterns out. A good ruler that you are confident and happy with using. They're all basics, but some of the other things I've shown you today are those extra little somethings that just make my life so much easier. So hopefully you've enjoyed that, and if there is anything that I haven't mentioned that you really rate, then pop it in the comments below, because I'd love to see what it is that you use all the time and that you rate. It might be something I have that maybe I don't use that often for whatever reason, or it might be something I've never come across before, because there are so many new tools going on the market all the time, so it's always good to compare notes with other sewers and see what everybody else is using.